Today we're discussing the mind of a war zone returnee or refugee, citing the Sudan case. And with us in the studio is the head of migration unit for the South West Zone of the National Commission for Refugees, Migrants and Internally Displaced Persons in Nigeria, Mr. Alexander Chibuzo Oturu. Remember, you can join the conversation on 0703 2277 338 or 0909 555 1039. You can call in or send us a text. You're welcome, Mr. Alex.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good to have you with us. Yes.
Good.
So, I was flipping through the papers a few days ago, and I saw that following the Sudan crisis, that we've been able to evacuate 1,598 Nigerians back into the country, and we have 1,200 still pending or waiting in Sudan to be evacuated. And then that at the airport, the Dangote Foundation gave each returnee 100,000 naira, and then MTN was also kind enough to give them data bundles and recharge cards. And this got me thinking, is there more? Do we do more than this? Yes, well, we applaud this initiative, but I just got curious that do we actually do more than this? Do we consider the mental health of these individuals? And that's why we reached out to you to come on the show and share your work with us. So as we progress into the show, we will talk about what you do for these individuals in terms of their mental health and help them adjust back after such a traumatic issue. So just help us with a few terminologies. I know I've seen the word refugee, I've seen economic migrant, I've seen stateless people, asylum. There's so many asylum seekers. Please just run us through each and what they mean.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much again. Thank you for having me. Just like you said, they were returned. We've had 1,598 Nigerians in Sudan. Interestingly, Sudan actually has the largest number of Nigerian migrants. There are over 1 million Nigerians that are resident in Sudan. But so far, just about 5,500 of them indicated interest in returning. But like you said, we have 1,598 that have returned and 1,200 that are ready to also return. In the next couple of days, they will be returned back safely.
So when you say return, is it that they go to the embassy, the Nigerian embassy in Sudan?
Well, Sudan is now not in a condition where they can easily, walk up to the embassy. But before now, they have indicated their interest. They've walked through their different associations. Most of them are students. Okay. So they've walked through, they have a students association, which they've walked through as well. Okay. They've coordinated very well with the embassy, the Nigerian embassy, as well with the Nigerian embassies in Egypt, Ethiopia, as well. They've all coordinated. So it's been a very, very all of government approach, to see that they are returned successfully.
Okay.
So in terms of terminologies, because I've heard on radio, on different kinds of media where people say, refugee in your own country and things like that. That's impossible. You can't be a refugee in your own country. So who is a refugee? Who is a returnee? Who is a migrant? Who is a stateless person? And all of that.
Who's an IDP?
Who's an IDP? Yeah. Interestingly, I actually do. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I have a series that I'm doing that kinds of demystifies some of these terminologies.
Okay, please share your LinkedIn handle with us.
It's my full name, Alexander Oturu.
Okay.
So if you check it out, I have a series, Migration Nuggets.
Okay.
So it just breaks down some of these terms that I might not be able to have enough time to break down today.
Okay.
So first of all, a migrant. Who is a migrant? A migrant is any person who crosses an international border. Now this is like generically speaking now. Crosses an international border for the purpose of settling down for a period of time. So the period of time might be 3 months, 6 months. Usually they say 12 months and above, but now at the international level, it's it's a bit more fluid. So it can be 3 months, can be 6 months. So once you leave and you cross an international border, you are a migrant, and for the purpose of settling down, taking up a new, residence. So that is a migrant. So now you can see that is kind of like a broad spectrum. That means there are different kinds of migrants.
Yeah.
One of those is the refugee. Now, a refugee has crossed an international border, but he has crossed for a particular reason, because he's facing persecution. According to the Geneva Convention, 1951 Geneva Convention on the Rights of a Refugee, he has fled because he's persecuted based on 5 grounds. He's persecuted based on his race, based on religion, based on his belonging to a particular social group based on his sex and based on his nationality or based on his political opinion. That's the fifth one.
Yeah.
So that means that he has to, fulfill those 5 grounds for him to be considered a refugee, and has to have crossed an international border. So that means you cannot be a refugee in your own country. So you leave your country, you cross the border, and then you are able to indicate that you are being persecuted in your country for any of those 5 reasons. Because of the tribe that you belong to, because of your religion, because of you belong to a particular social group, or because of your political opinion. Yeah.
Okay.
But now, then that country now has to accept that you are actually being persecuted and then grant you the status of a refugee.
Okay.
When you are undergoing that process, you are considered an asylum seeker. You are seeking asylum.
Okay.
But then when you are now granted the status, you can now be considered to be a refugee. So then you now have an IDP. An IDP is, he has been displaced from his habitual place of residence, but he has not crossed an international border.
Okay.
So he's still within his country. So, for example, you live in Port Harcourt and then something happens, maybe there's a flood or an earthquake, God forbid, or whatever it is, and you are forced to leave your place. Or there is, a breakdown of law and order, there's violence and what have you. So you have to cross the border. And you have to leave your habitual place of residence. You are now considered an IDP because you are still within your country. Yeah.
Okay.
And you are still under the protection of your country. Your country still has the responsibility to provide protection for you, to provide, housing, feeding, whatever it is that you may require.
Okay.
Yeah. So
stateless person.
Now, a stateless person, this is also an interesting situation where a person is not considered to be a national of any country, of any particular country. Is that possible? Yes, it's very possible. What makes you a national of a country is because you have the legal documents that indicate that you are a national. Okay. So it's either you were born there, so you have a birth certificate, or you have a passport, or you have a national ID card.
Okay.
There must be something that, indicates that you have that nationality.
Okay.
So if you do
does
not
a PVC count?
Yes,
just curious.
It's a form of identification, and then it also indicates your nationality. So yes, it can count as a form of identification that just ties you to a particular nation. So it is possible that persons are don't have a nationality. There are some, for example, when we had the issue with the Bakassi Peninsula, when a portion of the peninsula was ceded from Nigeria to Cameroon, there were persons there who found themselves in a stateless situation because then at that point they didn't consider themselves to be Cameroonians, and they were no longer Nigerians.
Wow.
So they were stateless.
I see.
So that's just an example. Yeah.
Okay.
And then sometimes there are some, but now there are a lot of laws in place that try to address the issue of statelessness, and so that's why you have situations like nationality by birth. So that, for example, if somebody is born now in the law of the sea, for example, if a child is born in the sea, in sort of like no man's land, there are some countries that would give the nationality of wherever the vessel is from, whatever country, whatever nation the country is, that
vessel is coming
from, the child would have the nationality of, just so that they don't have a stateless.
Interesting.
situation.
That's fantastic. This is a whole different sector. We didn't even know this existed. So I came across the 1951 Geneva Refugee Convention, which was expanded in 1967, and it clearly spells out who a refugee is and the kind of legal protection, assistance, social rights who he or she can receive from the countries who have signed the documents. Did that come out well?
I understand.
So, okay. Yeah. So that was how, because I'm supposed to read it verbatim as I saw it. I just quoted it.
Okay.
So can you take us through that? What's the convention about?
Yeah, is
it something that mandates all countries to accept refugees? What is it about?
I already referenced it earlier when I talked about the 5 grounds upon which a person can be considered to be a refugee. So that was extracted from that convention. So that is what it basically indicates, and then it spells out the rights and protections that they should have. So every country that has signed onto that is expected to, as a show of good faith, to follow through. But of course, some countries, it's not it's not like black and white that it must be exactly like this, but that is like the standard and what is expected of all countries.
Okay.
But every country interprets it in different ways, and they still have their sovereign rights to decide how they want to apply it. Yes.
Are there countries
But
that
there are
don't
countries
take
that,
refugees at
there are
all?
even some countries that haven't assented to it. But then
wow.
there's another
Since 1967.
Yes, there's another what will I call it now? Protection that is under international human rights law. That is the what's it called now? The principle of non-refoulement. Now, what that principle indicates, and this is binding on all countries, whether you've assented to the Refugee Convention or not, that means that no country has the right to return a person to a country where their life will be in danger, where they're going to face persecution or face any form of violence against their rights. So that protection is binding on all states. So even if they are not signed on to the Refugee Convention, if you come to that country and you can prove to them and you're telling them that if they take you back to where you're coming from, your life will be in danger, they should not take you back. Yes. And that's why the UK, in trying to trying to get over that hurdle, they now signed that agreement with Rwanda, so that failed asylum seekers who insist that they cannot return back to their country can now be taken to Rwanda for settlement, whatever.
Really? I don't understand. How does that work?
So, for example, if somebody runs from Nigeria to the UK and is seeking asylum in the UK, and the UK looks at his case and said they can't give him asylum, but because he is saying that if he returns back to Nigeria, his life will be in danger, he will be killed, XYZ, so they will now send him to Rwanda. So there's an agreement between the UK and Rwanda to take in. Yes, it's been all over the news.
Oh wow, I've not been following.
So
interesting.
So they will now send him there, and then there's a whole agreement with funding and all of that to take care of them. Yeah,
that's interesting. But when they get to Rwanda, are they allowed to work freely, or they have to be
I
in the
don't know
camp?
the particulars of the agreement with Rwanda, but
so tell us, there's I noticed that refugees in our country are allowed to work freely, are allowed to move around freely. But I remember watching this movie called The Swimmers, where Syrian refugees crossed the sea to Germany, and then when they got to Germany, they were all put in a box, hostel-like box, and they had to remain in that box until their legal status was confirmed and all that.
yeah.
For us, it's different. So you come in here, you're allowed to. Is it that the process is shorter, is duration shorter? Do you also do those legal things too, and then before you release them, or what's it like? What's the difference?
Every country, like I said earlier, every country adopts a different system in a way they interpret the Refugee Convention. Now, interestingly, Germany, I think, has the third highest refugee population in the world. We're talking about over 2 million refugees that they are currently housing. So they are doing a good job when it comes to that. Nigeria just has about 89,000 refugees in all from different countries. So we also have a system in place. It's called the Refugee Status Determination System. So when an asylum seeker comes in, they have to go through that process, and the process where their cases will be determined, where if we have officers that are trained to go through their cases and identify and see if they actually meet up to the standard of the Refugee Convention, and if they are, then they are granted the status. But within that period, because we do not Nigeria does not believe in having refugee camps. We once had one in Oru, in Ogun State, but it's been shut down.
Okay.
Because when you have refugee camps, you make people dependent. They are dependent on you for daily living, for handouts and things like that. Okay. Because we want Nigeria being a big brother of Africa, we want Africans to feel welcome. We want our brothers and sisters to feel welcome. So we allow them to come in and allow them to work. Okay. So they are able to at least fend for themselves, pending when their cases are resolved. And if their cases are resolved, then they can also continue. They are providing, they are contributing to the economy as well.
Very
so
true.
It's not that they're just working. I was actually going to put on an outfit, that was made for me by a refugee. from I think Congo DRC. So these
are they're coming with their skills.
They're coming with skills. They're coming with their capacities and things like that, experiences and all of that. We have some of them that are medical doctors that are practicing now. Some of them are in law school. So it's important that you allow them to do that so that they can be integrated fully into the society, and then they can also contribute their own quota.
So once they come in, what tribe do you now place them under? Do they choose a tribe? I want to be Efik. I want to be.
No, they're just.
So we'll take a quick break and then we'll return.
All right.
We're still here with Mr. Alexander Oturu from the National Commission for Refugees, Migrants, and Internally Displaced Persons. So talking about internally displaced persons, IDP persons, UNHCR statistics have suggested that we have over 3.1 million people that have been displaced from the northeast due to insurgency. Can you confirm these numbers? And how are you, if you have 3.1 million people living in IDPs, how is the agency able to cope? That's a lot of people,
Just to clarify, yes, we do have 3.1 million that have been displaced due to insurgency. So last year, the number rose to just above 5 million because of the flood situation that we had last year. But one thing that is important to note is that the IDP status is not a permanent status. So when you say we have 3.1 million IDPs, it doesn't mean that they are all living in IDP camps. It doesn't mean that you have 3.1 million persons living in IDP camps.
So what's the maximum capacity for your camps? What's the ideal maximum capacity?
There's no... let me just paint the picture first. Now, so when you have 3.1 million persons that are displaced, that means that, yes, their habitual places of residence has been affected, so they've had to move out of that. But because as an IDP, you're in Nigeria, and for example, if your house collapses today, you've been displaced, you're an IDP. But then you have a brother that lives in Shumulu, or a cousin that lives in Ikeja, so you can easily drive down there. You are no longer in quotes displaced, at least you have somewhere to lay your head. So you have that kind of situation. So you have persons who have left that whole environment completely and have gone somewhere else. So they actually, are taking care of themselves. They are not considered IDPs in that sense because they don't live in the camps. So it's important to clarify that, so that even if you're saying there are 3.1 million or 5 points,
not every one of them,
all of them are
residents in the camps.
The camps have, limited. I can't really say, this is the standard number of an IDP camp, but at least there are certain things that need to be in place for you to have an IDP camp. There are certain facilities that need to be in place. There are certain services that need to be provided. Like there should be.
So what kind of people would end up in the camps? Is it mostly people with disabilities or people from the lower socioeconomic class?
Yes,
what do you think?
You have people from
or people with poor support.
People that have a poor support system that don't really have anywhere else to go. So people from villages, really rural areas that really don't have anywhere else to go. So those are the ones that end up being in camps. So some people might just move on with their lives and say, I don't wanted to move away from here before. So
the opportunity.
To move. So
was there a maximum tenure? I see you're the Southwest coordinator. So does that mean that I don't think, do we have any camps in the Southwest?
We don't have camps. We have settlements. We have some settlements where some IDPs have settled, and so we have them in some parts of Lagos as well, some other parts of the Southwest. We have some in Aja, some in Ikeja, Oba.
Settlement being that the government has built accommodation,
just where they congregated themselves, and so but the government is now trying to see how to assist them and provide some services for them. So you have those kind of things that happens, but it's not, there's no camp per se, because they actually they go out, they have jobs, they ride okadas, they do different things to support themselves.
That's in the Southwest, but in other parts of the country,
in other parts, particularly in the areas that are affected, like in the northeast,
they have camps.
You have camps. You have actual camps.
Interesting. So going back to the newspaper article that started this conversation, and it says that the evacuees, how do you refer to them?
Yes,
Evacuees.
evacuees.
The evacuees were given 100,000 naira each, and I'm really concerned about the mental health support that these people get, because we can see from America, there's a big veteran issue in America. War veterans come back, their mental health were not duly attended to, and today we see the repercussions, gun violence and so many other things. Yes, so we know that there can be long-term effects or repercussions for not providing that initial care that they need. It's been a very traumatic experience for them. What do you guys do as an agency to attend to these people in terms of their psychological care?
Yes, so aside from the 100,000 naira that you mentioned and the recharge cards that they got, there's a whole system in place. We have what's called a reintegration committee, and this exists in almost all the states now, and it's made up of all the government agencies and also civil society organizations, NGOs and international NGOs that provide different kinds of services. So services like mental health and psychosocial support, socioeconomic reintegration services, different kinds of services. So when a returnee returns, like you have them returning en masse, they go through a process of profiling. Now, the officers there are trained in psychological first aid, so they're able to identify those that have psychosocial needs, and they're also trained, to look at other issues as well that they may need, those that need socioeconomic support, those that might have some legal issues, for example, those that may have been trafficked. At that point, it's also identified that, okay, this person has been trafficked, and so there's a whole system of referral. There's a referral network that, has agencies like NAPTIP. Aside from NCFRMA, you have NAPTIP, you have other agencies, you have international agencies, you have the International Organization for Migration, IOM, you have other agencies, GIZ, that they can be referred to, to receive different services, and all of these officers are trained. They all have, these training. We have some CSOs that are very skilled in trauma healing. And so when we identify returnees, because it's not everybody that has those needs, and then it's also important to point out that when it comes to reintegration services, it's not forced upon the returnee. So a returnee can come back and say, oh, he doesn't want all these things that you're talking about, I just want to go home. So we won't force them to go into a program and all of that, but we can only make our recommendations and make referrals.
But in that kind of situation, is there like a long-term follow-up? I don't know, some form of contact tracing, or we don't go that far?
there is follow-up. Okay. Once, and then, like I said, you have to have the buy-in of the returnee, because every reintegration has to be migrant-centered. So if the migrant is not willing to receive that service, you can't impose it on them. So if you follow up, there are some of them that maybe after a couple of weeks that they've returned, when we follow up, they're like, oh, now we want that, we've been looking for your number since we misplaced it. Yeah. Okay. And there are some that when you call them after 2 weeks, they're like, we said we don't want. Leave us, we are fine.
So you follow up.
So there's that follow up.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. That's fantastic. You guys are doing great work.
So we're open to collaborate. Like I said, it's not just the government. We implement a kind of all of government and all of society approach. So it's not just government agencies involved. We also have CSOs involved. We have NGOs, international organizations. So we're open to collaborate with every organization that can provide extra services. So if you have if you are able to provide pro bono, of course, psychosocial support to returnees, we would receive your services with open arms.
Okay, Mr. Alex, so we had some messages come in. We have a question for you. Someone says, if someone comes here illegally, can they come to your organization for assistance?
That question is very vague. If someone comes, and then also just
one more comment. This is very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Gibbs, for this awesome topic. Is it bad to be a refugee? So 2 questions for you.
Okay.
Is it bad to be a refugee? And if someone comes in illegally.
Okay, so first of all,
they come to you with their full chest.
Yeah, first of all, in the humanitarian space, we are moving away from referring to migrants as illegal. We know that we hear a lot, especially from a certain president of the US, about illegal immigrants. We keep hearing that they are illegals. That term is seen as derogatory, because a human being cannot be illegal. So we refer to them as irregular migrants because they are in an irregular situation, that means, or sometimes they're also referred to as undocumented. Now, so if somebody comes in irregularly, can they come to us? Now, an asylum seeker, for example, because that's what I think that person is asking. An asylum seeker is escaping from his habitual place of residence, country of residence, because something is happening there.
Can poverty count as something to escape from? Just asking.
It's not. It doesn't fall into. It doesn't fall into those.
Is too much.
It doesn't fall into the 5 grounds that
so
we
you
spoke
would
of.
You say go back.
So yeah.
No.
Yeah. You know the issue of those 5 grounds.
That thing.
The issue of those 5 grounds. Now, aside from the 5 grounds, we also have the I think it's 1969 African Union Convention on Refugees that expands, especially for African states, expands the latitude for what is or who is considered a refugee. And so you now have they now consider places where there is generalized violence and things like that, you know, breakdown of law and order. Basically, the whole essence of providing protection, of another country agreeing to provide protection to a migrant, is because they no longer feel that their country can protect them. They no longer feel that their country has the capacity to provide protection for them, or their country is refusing to provide protection, for them. So poverty is not that.
It doesn't count.
it doesn't count.
What about dictatorship? Countries that were under.
So yes,
count?
Yes, it can count if you can prove that there is that direct impact on you, on that individual. So if somebody, I was trying to say that if somebody leaves, that kind of situation, maybe a breakdown of law and order, generalized violence, it's possible that you would leave without your documents, without your passport. You will not go to the Nigerian embassy and look for a visa, because you're escaping, you're fleeing. So it's understandable that they come without any travel documents, and so yes, they will be received, and then their cases will be dealt with on a case by case basis.
Are NGOs able to provide money for shelter?
Yes, NGOs are welcome to provide.
With,
yes.
Normally,
yes, they do.
They
Some
get
of them
access
do, yes.
to some funding and all that.
Yes, and international organizations as well provide services. Then, is it a bad thing to be a refugee?
Yeah, is there some stigma attached to it?
Well, there is stigma that is attached to it. It's not a good thing, really.
Because I remember the movie I told you about, the swimmers.
Yes.
The ladies were professional swimmers in Syria.
Okay.
I went to Germany. I wanted to swim for the German team.
Wow.
But they tried and they refused to
let
them naturalize them.
Okay. Yeah.
So they had to. The Olympics created a refugee team,
yes.
and they had to join. So it almost seemed like there was some form of stigma. I don't know what.
Yes, there is. Like? There is a stigma. So
who is stigmatizing who?
By definition, really, it is not a good thing to be a refugee, because you are fleeing persecution. That means you were persecuted in the first place, or something has happened to where you're coming from. There's been a breakdown of law and order. So, literally speaking, that's not a good thing.
It's an unfortunate
situation.
It's an unfortunate
situation. Yes, it's not something good. But then the person should not be stigmatized, because it's not the person's fault that they are suffering persecution.
But
so
do people get stigmatized?
But people do
in the country in which
in the country in which they are seeking asylum, because for different reasons. Some countries, especially in Europe and some other parts of the world, have started adopting a kind of nationalist political viewpoint, which talks about us first. So when they see anybody, might not even be a refugee, might just be a migrant, from an immigrant from a different country, there's that stigma that, oh, you don't belong here. So that kind of thing, it's a stigma that comes with it. Even returnees, some Nigerians who have traveled out and maybe ended up being voluntarily returned or were deported, they also experience some stigma, because their communities. So there's a whole lot of work that we do. We have some community engagement programs that we run, to try and just make where they are going to be returning to be more welcome, more accepting of them. So we have some community dialogue programs that we have, to engage religious leaders, community leaders, youth leaders, and all of that, just so that there's that, they
acceptance.
have that acceptance, and there's a reduction of the stigma. So stigma does happen.
Exist. Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. So you're a national organization?
Yes.
Or you part of the international? I know there's the UNHCR and then you are the national body.
Yes.
So you guys are strictly focused on Nigeria and its affairs.
Yes, Nigeria and its affairs.
So what differentiates you from the UNHCR?
Yes, Nigeria and its affairs, but they're not just Nigerian migrants, because refugees in Nigeria are not Nigerians. They are foreign nationals who are seeking asylum here. And then we're also interested in protecting the rights of immigrants who work, who have jobs here and who might be facing some persecution in their workplace as well. That's also a concern to us. So, but it has to be, of course, within the ambit of Nigeria. That Nigeria is the meeting point. So it's either you're a migrant living in Nigeria that needs our protection, or you're a refugee living in Nigeria needs our protection.
What about the waterways?
Yes, of course. Nigeria has its
an extent.
Yes, there's an extent.
Just the Atlantic Ocean.
There's I can't remember the exact kilometer distance now that every country enjoys with regards to the waterways, but there's a specification on that.
So if I want to give birth to a British citizen, I can just enter a ship and cross the Nigerian border and then seek asylum in the ocean. Don't mind me.
That would be a creative way to go about it. I wouldn't advise anybody to do that.
So just wanted to go to the mental health implications. So we're very familiar that when people go through traumatic issues, it's a very stressful experience.
Yes.
So we expect that there will be an acute stress reaction in the initial phase. You could be nervous, you could be afraid, could be, some people start to have palpitations, headaches, Just imagine how we feel when we start to feel stressed.
Exactly, yeah.
People experience that in the acute phase of their. So my producer is asking me to open the phone lines once again. So the numbers to call or text are 0703 2277 338, 0703 2277 or 0909 555 1039, 0909 555 1039. So just wanted to talk about, I'm glad that your agency is sounds very structured. Sounds like you guys have been doing this for a long time.
Since 1989.
Wow. So there's already structure. You're aware of the implications, and that's really good to hear, But it's just important to also reiterate that, there are mental health consequences of crossing borders, of war, of trauma, and all those things. And these things occur in phases. So the initial phase will be the acute stress reaction, like how we feel when we're stressed out on the short term, and after 48 hours, it can now become an acute stress disorder, where those symptoms are now more persistent.
Yeah.
Feeling stressed, you're feeling worked up, you're feeling nervous, you're having nightmares, you're finding it difficult to sleep. It's a wide range of symptoms. But the very important one that I'm sure you're familiar with is what we call the post-traumatic stress disorder. People talk about it a lot. Oh, I have PTSD, A lot of people don't really know what PTSD is about. So some of those people that you say, oh, let's talk to you, that say, oh, I'm fine,
Yeah.
6 months down the line, 2 years down the line, 5 years, they can come down with PTSD. And then at that point, they think it's someone from their hometown that's chasing them, not understanding that it was because they didn't go through the process. So it's just to reiterate, it's important for the government to also understand, it's important for people to understand that when they get to that, at that point in the airports where you guys are like, come, let's just talk, let's offer some care. It's important to accept it at that point, and let's not trivialize it, because there are long-term consequences to these things.
Just to even add, I wrote one time on my LinkedIn, I was just talking about the fact that aside from those migrants who have experienced a traumatic situation, those who have migrated irregularly, that go through, these issues, even when you migrate regularly, there is a level of stress that you go through,
true.
So you can imagine somebody who is going regularly, who, is doing the right thing, is still having those stressors, because even when you travel and you want to integrate, it's a stressor already, because it's a new environment.
Travel is a stressor.
Yes, it's a new environment, new people and all of that. So you're going through all that stress as well. Now imagine somebody who now has, a traumatic situation attached with. Imagine somebody who has been trafficked. So it's important that if the help comes, take it with open arms.
Yes, it's important for us to accept it, and also just to reach out to everyone out there. If there's anyone that has been through trauma, been evacuated, returned, crossed irregularly, and currently you're experiencing symptoms like nightmares, frequent nightmares, you wake up at night, remembering the things that occurred in Sudan or Ukraine or wherever you're coming from, or even during the daytime while you're awake, you're having flashbacks. So those experiences just come back in flashes. You remember them, and in those moments they frighten you or make you uneasy. That's one thing to look out for. If you find that you start to avoid reminders of the trauma, so reminders of the Sudan situation or Ukraine or whatever traumatic situation it is, that's also something to look out for. People that also develop PTSD also start to have mood changes. So you see someone that has returned, a student that has returned 6 months down the line, the student's mood seems to be very unstable, having anger outbursts, very hyper vigilant, getting nervous over every little thing. You slam the door, the person becomes nervous. Who slammed the door? Who shut the door? What's going on? If you find that your child or your relative is becoming very hyper aroused or hyper vigilant or having mood changes, these are things that you shouldn't sweep under the carpet. These are things that you shouldn't pray away.
Exactly.
That might be the time to now look for Mr. Alex's number and call Mr. Alex. I'm like, it's like there's something going on, so that we can walk them through that process, because PTSD can have a very long-term effect, that can hold the person down for many years. I remember when you read about the history of these veterans, you see them many years, 20 years after, they act out of character. They're doing things that their family members, some people even become very numb. So mood changes can be anger outbursts. For some people it's emotional numbing, so they're not reacting the way they should react in certain situations. Everybody is laughing about the situation, they're not laughing. Everybody's crying about the death of a loved one, they're not crying. So they're like emotionally numb. So once you see these changes after trauma, it's important to reach out for trauma support or psychological support. And I also just wanted to also stress the 4 F's of trauma responses. So during those times when you're interviewing them, when you're seeing them in that initial phase, people can present with 4 types of trauma responses. So we have the fight, the flight, the freeze, and the fawn. I don't know if you've heard of that. I know we're very familiar with fight and flight.
Fight and flight, yeah.
But now we have freeze and we have fawn. So we know the fight response. So you meet someone at the airport, the person is having anger outbursts, shouting. I'm sure you guys are already trained not to react. You expect it. It's obviously a trauma response. You shouldn't get worked up over that. Just understand and walk through the process with the person. For some people it's flight. They try to escape whatever situation. Those are the ones that probably reject everything. They just want to go as far as possible away from the situation. Their response is flight in trauma. But we also have those that freeze. So the response you expect, you won't see it. Maybe you're expecting them, everybody else is crying about the situation, everyone else is responding a certain way, but they are numb, they are frozen. They're not, so we say they dissociate. So it's almost like they're not really existing in that situation. They're not feeling the feelings that other people are feeling, and that's also a trauma response. And then fawn type, which is a new one, FAWN, which is a newly discovered trauma response, is where the person just wants things to be, let me just coast, let me just lay low, let me just do what needs to be done, so that eyes are off me, so that nobody sees what I'm going through. So they just want to, I'll be nice, I'll do what you want. What do you want me to? I'll do whatever you want. So they're just going to just lay low. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to, just to make sure that eyes are off them and everybody focuses on. So even if that is also occurring, that can also be the trauma response. So I just wanted us to just talk a bit more about this, and the fact that when trauma responses go on for too long, it becomes toxic stress to the body. We're talking about acute stress reaction. Stress now dragging for too long, you're seeing trauma responses, you're allowing them to continue like that, it becomes toxic stress to the person, and eventually the person can now have other mental health conditions, other physical health conditions. So that's when you can see that 3, 4 years, 5 years down the line, person now comes out with hypertension, depression, immunity is low, increased anxiety, or it even becomes a substance and alcohol abuse situation. So someone that wasn't drinking before, 5 years after the trauma, starts to drink excessively or smoke excessively. So these are some of the things we see. So the aim of this whole conversation was just to enlighten the public about the situation. People see these things, but they don't talk about it. But I believe the more we know, the more knowledge we have, the more we are able to do. And it's important that when we learn things, we should teach other people. They said each one should teach one. So that we are all more aware. Thank you so much, Mr. Alex. Thank you so much. And for your team that came along, Thank you guys for coming. We're very happy that we have such a structured organization in the country. And this show was brought to you by the Freudian Center, which is a drug and alcohol treatment facility located in Victoria Island, Lagos. We can be reached on 0809 60075, 0809 60075, and you can send us an email on info@freudiancenter.com. Center is CENTRE. Until next week, Wednesday, 10 a.m., we remain the legit therapist, Dr. Gibbs, and my colleague Gibbs.